This happened 3 years ago in a crumbling Soviet-era high-rise on the city outskirts. A typical, sleeping district, with flickering lights and the heavy smell of damp concrete. I was returning from a late shift at 2 a.m. After reaching my fourth-floor landing, I froze. The hallway was unnaturally silent. Suddenly, from the floor above, came a distinct, wet sigh. I looked up. The light bulb on the stairs flickered and died, plunging everything into oily darkness. I heard a sound like dry branches scraping against a window. Shshhhh, shhhh. Something was descending with agonizing slowness. A hand emerged from the shadows, unnaturally long, with translucent fingers clutching the railing. My heart hammered against my ribs. The figure didn't walk, it flowed from step to step, its movements liquid and jerky. When it drifted into the dim light of my landing, I nearly screamed. It was a humanoid shape in a filthy gray shroud, but it had no face. Just smooth, bone-white skin with shallow depressions where eyes should be. It stopped 3 meters away, dead still. Then, from its hollow chest, came the exact voice of my deceased grandmother. "Grandson, why are you so late? Open the door quickly, I'm so cold." The sound of my grandmother's voice felt like a physical blow. She had been buried for 5 years, yet this rasping, gentle tone was unmistakable. Looking at the faceless nightmare made my brain scream in denial. My trembling hand managed to slide the key into the lock. The click felt like a gunshot. I didn't take my eyes off the creature as its spindly fingers twitched. "Open the door, dear," it repeated with a sickening, wet gurgle. The entity tilted its featureless head, a movement so inhuman it looked like a glitch in reality. It took a weightless step forward. I lunged inside, slamming the heavy door and throwing every bolt. I leaned against the wood, gasping for air. I waited for the pounding, for the scratching. But there was only a thick, poisonous silence. Then, the floorboards in my living room creaked. Not the door, the floor inside. A soft, rhythmic shhhh sound began to move from the kitchen toward me. I realized with pure horror that I hadn't checked the windows. My apartment was on the 4th floor, but height meant nothing to those long limbs. From the darkness of my own corridor, the voice spoke again, barely an inch from my ear. "Why did you lock me out, grandson? Let me into the warmth of your skin." The realization that the creature was already inside turned my blood to ice. My sanctuary had become a tomb. I didn't move, feeling the vibrations as the shhhh sound grew closer. In the suffocating darkness, an elongated, spindly silhouette took shape. It stood far too tall for the ceiling, its head tilted at a broken, 90-degree angle. The smell hit me, a cloying scent of damp earth and old funeral flowers. It was the smell of a freshly opened grave. "I can feel your heart beating," the voice murmured, now a grotesque chorus of my father's baritone and a childhood friend's laugh. The creature's translucent fingers brushed the wallpaper, leaving dark, oily streaks. I fumbled for my phone, but as the screen lit up, I saw something that made my knees buckle. The entity had no shadow. In the glow, it looked like a shimmering hole in the fabric of the room. It stopped at the edge of the living room, swaying its faceless head like an animal sniffing for fear. "Don't be afraid," the chorus whispered. "We only want to borrow your eyes. We've forgotten what the light looks like." It raised a hand, fingers elongating like tentacles reaching for my face. I scrambled toward the kitchen, hoping for a weapon, but the creature let out a mechanical, radio-like screech. The mechanical screech vibrated in my teeth. I grabbed the heavy iron skillet from the counter, my only lifeline. The creature didn't flinch. It stood in the doorway, its shroud billowing in a non-existent wind. Its faceless head twitched curious and cold. "Such a heavy heart," the voice whispered in my mother's tone. "Why fight the cold?" It expanded, its limbs stretching to touch both sides of the narrow doorframe. I swung the skillet with all my terror. The iron hit its head with a sickening, wet thud, like striking rotting fruit. But there was no resistance. The metal passed through the bone-white skin like thick smoke, leaving a jagged tear that emitted a thin, gray mist. The entity didn't scream. It tilted its head further, the tear stitching itself back together with a squelching sound. I backed away, my heels hitting the sliding glass door of the balcony. I fumbled for the latch, eyes fixed on the swaying shape. "The balcony is a long way down," it croaked in an ancient, grinding rasp. "But we can catch you. We have so many hands." As the glass door slid open, a blast of freezing night air hit my back. I stepped out onto the narrow concrete ledge, for stories above the void. The creature followed, its fingers crushing the metal railing like dry straw. I was trapped between a fall and a nightmare. The freezing wind whipped my hair as I balanced on the narrow ledge. Below, the street was a void of pitch-black shadows, swallowed by a churning sea of mist. My knuckles were white as I gripped the freezing railing, which groaned under the creature's immense strength. The entity didn't step out. It stretched through the open door, limbs elongating like a distorted reflection. Its pale arms circled my waist with a grip cold enough to burn through my coat. "Don't look down," the chorus whispered inside my skull. "The fall is only a moment." I looked at the creature's faceless head. For a second, the skin rippled, and needle-like teeth pushed outward, forming a jagged maw, a lightless tunnel. A wave of nausea hit me. It wasn't just trying to kill me, it was waiting for my spirit to fracture so it could step inside the cracks. I glanced at the neighbor's balcony, 2 meters away. A suicidal jump, but the alternative was being pulled into that maw. I kicked the creature's arm, but my boot passed through the mist with a squelch. It laughed, a sound of joyful, terrifying children's voices. "You cannot run from what you are made of," it croaked. With a roar of defiance, I let go of the railing and lunged toward the dark shadow of the next balcony, the wind roaring as gravity took hold. For a heartbeat, I was suspended in the freezing air, ghosts howling in my ears. Gravity pulled me down with violent force. My fingers scratched at the neighbor's rough concrete, nails snapping as I fought for a grip. I slammed into the railing, knocking the air from my lungs, but hauled myself over the edge. I lay there, gasping, waiting for the translucent fingers to close around my throat. But when I looked back, my balcony was empty. The door was shut, the room was dark. Then I looked down at the street. It was gone. The asphalt and cars were replaced by a bottomless abyss of gray fog. The building was now a solitary pillar floating in a void. "You jumped," a voice whispered from the apartment behind me. I turned slowly. Inside, the lights were on, a warm, trapped amber glow. A figure sat at the kitchen table with its back to me, wearing my coat and boots, holding my phone. The figure turned its head. I saw my own face staring back, but the eyes were empty, bone-white pits leaking mist. "You jumped," my own voice said. "And now I am the only one left to stay warm." The thing in my chair began to scroll through my messages, its movements perfect, while I stood shivering in a world that no longer existed. I hammered on the glass, fists bruising against the pane, but no sound came out. The air was too thin for screams. My double looked up, fixating those white pits on me. It leaned forward, its breath fogging the glass with an oily mist that didn't fade. The leap was the final piece. My voice vibrated inside my chest. "You gave up your weight and your shadow. Now you are just a memory." The creature stood, mimicking my posture with terrifying precision. It walked to the door and placed its palm against mine, separated by the glass. I felt only an agonizing, soul-deep cold sucking the color from my vision. The balcony began to fray, the bricks turning to gray ash that crumbled into the abyss. I realized the stairwell and the leap were a grotesque harvest. The entity wanted to replace me, to use my life as a vessel among the living. They would see me at work, me at home, never knowing I was gone. I looked at the iron skillet, now covered in frost. I didn't strike the glass. Instead, I closed my eyes and whispered a name, the real name of my grandmother whose voice it had stolen. I focused on the memory of her real warmth, a fire the entity could never truly replicate. "You are not her," I hissed. "And you are not me." The name was a spark of fire in my frozen throat. As the word left my lips, the amber light inside flickered and died, replaced by a pulsing, sickly green glow. The figure wearing my face didn't scream, it unraveled. Its skin peeled back like wet parchment, revealing the hollow mist beneath. The glass dissolved into a liquid that smelled of funeral flowers. I stepped forward, not into a kitchen, but back into the dark fourth-floor landing where it all began. The abyss vanished. I was in my old building again, breathing stagnant air. The creature had collapsed into a pile of sagging shrouds, translucent fingers twitching. "You remembered," the chorus hissed, fading into a metallic sound. "But the light you returned to is not the one you left." The entity sank into the shadows and vanished. I walked to my door and looked in the hallway mirror. Face was there, eyes dark and full of life. As I entered my apartment, I froze. My shadow, cast by the flickering bulb, didn't move when I did. It stayed rooted for a second, its head tilted at an impossible angle, before snapping back. I had returned, but a part of the cold stayed in my bones. I locked the door, knowing that if I hear a sigh in the dark, I won't know if it's outside or living inside my own chest.